Make sure all my phones are off.
Hey, what's up, Maisie? What's going on, brother? Good. All right, well, ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. How are y'all doing? Good afternoon. Thank y'all for joining us for today's talk. We'll do introductions shortly, but this is a presentation on growing healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities and the work we're doing here in San Antonio. This is our table of contents. So just so you know what we're going to be going over, of course, we'll introduce ourselves. We'll be talking about the problem and then some solutions that we're, again, doing here in San Antonio.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Rocky. I am by trade an engineer, but I'm also a clinical herbalist and activist around food and farming. I help to land steward about 1.5 acres of land on the east side called Heavenly Gardens, and founder of Sustainable G's, which focuses on land stewardship, building connection through building and restoring dignity through our connection with land, as well as a focus on cultural food legacies. And so how do we empower our people to eat better by making those cultural connections through our food? And so I'm super happy to be here with you guys.
Yes, my name is Stephen Lucky. I am the founder and CEO of a local nonprofit called Gardopia Gardens. We teach people how to live healthy, sustainable lifestyles through urban agriculture. In addition to that, I am starting a cooperative as well, so that employees can own their business and create that equitable opportunity for employment. And our locations are on the east side of San Antonio. I saw some of y'all at the tour this past Sunday, so thank you for visiting us. For those of y'all who are still in town, I encourage y'all to come check us out later today or later this week. So we're going to start out with the problems. We like to say, think global, act local. One of the things when founding Gardopia, you can become overwhelmed with all of the problems that are on this planet. We know that population growth is continuing. There's warfare over natural resources, all these different things that are occurring on our planet. And so that's sort of at the global level that we are taking data, evidence, and just the overall opportunities that are being presented to us, specifically the Sustainability Development Goals, SDGs. Who's aware of those? A few of y'all? Okay, so United Nations, right, you have all these presidents and prime ministers and leaders around the world have come together to set these goals by 2030. Goal number 1 is no poverty, right? And a lot of times when we speak of the problem, these are symptoms of poverty. And one of those symptoms, goal number 2, is zero hunger. So for us, that's really big for organic farmers and gardeners, right? We have the opportunity to address the second biggest goal on planet Earth of making sure that folks are fed and are able to have the proper nutrition for them. You go from there, third, good health and well-being. And we know that our health is directly related to nutrition, right? If you have healthy food options, then most likely you're going to have the opportunity to live a healthier lifestyle physically, and then that goes into your mental health and beyond that. So these are 2 things that we really look at in regards to how our food system is relating at an international level. Again, with the United Nations, there's something called the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so they've put out reports for at least a couple of decades at this point. The last report, a comprehensive on climate change, was in 2022, but they did put out another report in 2023. And the reason that I show you all this is because essentially one chapter is on food security. It's chapter 5. And not to paint a gloom and doom situation, but essentially these leaders are saying that because of climate change, we're going to have less arable land, right? So less land that is able to be cultivated on, which can lead to mass migration and warfare over natural resources. And we're actually seeing it right now. Like we're in that moment right now. And so it can be very scary, right? It can be climate anxiety that maybe we can experience. It's good to have the data behind us, right? To say, hey, this is what's happening again at an international level. This was most recently in Switzerland about a year ago, saying that our food system needs to transform around climate change. And so this are just a few data points that we have. All of us, are experiencing extreme heat. This past summer in Texas was the hottest in recorded history. If we get to 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, then we're going to be 14% of the population could be exposed. If you go up another 0.5% Celsius, that goes by 2.6 times higher to 37%. Specifically for us as gardeners and farmers, we have species loss. We have plant loss. We can have up to 8 to 16% plant loss. Species loss of insects, between 6 to 18% of species loss. So thinking about that effects that has with pest management, think about the different varieties of crops and plants that we can grow are going to continue to dwindle. There's this idea that we're currently in a mass extinction. Going on further to ecosystems, where 7 to 13% of our ecosystems could have a new biome. Crop yields, and this one's really big for us, right? A 3 to 7% decrease in crop yields. So we're growing less food and the population is increasing, right? So the math is not adding up, which is going to continue to lead to our food insecurity. And for those of y'all who are on the coast, thinking about our fisheries, a 1.5 million tons to 3 million tons decrease in harvest of our fisheries. So again, these are challenges that we are all experiencing at the international level. As we come down to our national level, the United States is also recognizing it. So for the first time in 50 years, the White House announced a conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. Was anybody aware of that or sort of following that a little bit, right? So that was in 2022, and I'm happy to see that our government is recognizing the problem. And they have a whole website, they have a roadmap, they have solutions and opportunities to engage with this work. But having that recognition is key. The next step is taking that action. And just a little bit more data for you showing that here in the Central South, right, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, we have above average instances of food insecurity. And that's really what drove me into this work initially, seeing the disparity in our communities and who is experiencing food insecurity, specifically in our Black and brown communities in the South. It's continuing to increase. We had a huge uptick during the pandemic, which I think we have right here, in food insecurity, but also in inflation of food costs, right? So just looking at this, in a 10-year period between 2013 to 2022, Houston is the closest to us. There was a 2.26% increase in inflation of food prices. Just in this past year, 2021 to 2022, we had a 12.57% inflation costs for food. And it's just not sustainable from an economic standpoint. And so we talk about sustainability, right? Everybody's talking about sustainability. There's something called the triple bottom line. So is it environmentally bearable? That's what most people think about. Can the environment bear this? But then there's also the economically viable. Is it viably financially for us to continue these practices? And then the one for agriculture, and specifically urban agriculture, that has the highest efficacy is it socially acceptable? Does the community even want this, right? So it could be the greatest idea since sliced bread. If the community doesn't want it, it doesn't matter because they're not going to adopt it and take those behaviors and practices into their own lifestyle. 12.57% increase. I have seen at my local HEB's prices double, right? Something that costs $1.50 is now $3. So I'm sure they're having these counting extrapolations and equations to figure this out, but we just know that food is increasing, food is becoming less available, and over time, we're going to be in a situation where we may not be able to produce as much food as we used to.
And so we'll also just talk a little bit about local problems. And so when you're thinking about all this data is important from the national level, but also when we're getting down to your why, what you want to do for your community, to start look at some of this local data. So for San Antonio alone, and we have a couple of slides, this kind of shows the access to affordable, healthy food, right? And it does it across the different ethnic groups that we have, all people of color. As you can see, majority of all people are having issues with access to affordable food, right? People that are living close to supermarkets, of course, pay less for their food versus those that are living in what we would call swamp desert areas or places where they are more than a mile away, don't have the transportation because of layers of social economic disparities that come across. And we also can see when we overlap some of this data that we get, that when we look at the different diseases or issues when it comes to living in poverty, that the diabetes hospitalization rate, this maps also over to the Black and brown communities that we talked about before. So it's these layered approaches, right, to understanding what gaps we have when it comes to having access to healthy food, understanding what is the different aspects that come from not having that access, and then what we want to do to be able to change it. And so there's this part where data is super important, right? We have data analytics, we have access to more data, but data doesn't mean anything if you don't include the people, right? So it's important, though, that we need to acknowledge the data is important, but there's this other layer of the people and where that intersects. So again, going to your local cities or asking for these reports to be made so we can, in San Antonio, we're fortunate enough to have some of these reports where we have a poverty report. This was in 2019. 1 in 5 children in Bexar County alone are food insecure, right, are experiencing food insecurity. So every day they don't have enough to eat, right? And we know what that means for child development, for behaviors, et cetera, within the school system. Then we look also when we're talking about the economic disparities or spread between, wealth and poverty. San Antonio is the second highest city in Texas where residents rely on cash and public assistance on a daily basis, right? So this adds into those layers to being able to afford healthy, fresh food and be able to have access to it. And so this kind of shows, right, when we're looking at the poverty rates, San Antonio is higher than Texas, higher than the United States alone. And of course, we definitely saw that when it came to the pandemic, across America, we saw the lines across the food bank for the San Antonio Food Bank of also showing this large gap in disparity. Here is just a visual that kind of shows all of these access to supermarkets as well as food deserts, high population right here around the east side where, right, people that are living in poverty have very low access. There's, through history of digging deeper into this graph, was able to find specifically on the east side where there had been more than 45 years where a community did not have access to a supermarket, right? An entire generation. So you can imagine how their food changed, how their health changed, how their access could change. These are the type of stories that we need to add to that data to give a wider understanding of the impacts that are happening to the community and why we want to prioritize these for making changes, or also be very intentional about the work that we do as farmers, as advocates, as nonprofit organizations, that you're being intentional about the work that you're doing to really make an impact, not just trying to check a box off of a number that gets reduced, right? So, so we have the data. Awesome. We have we feel in our hearts there's a problem. We don't know where to start. We want to fix something. We're thinking about our community. So here we have some solutions about our different advocacy work that we can do. It's overwhelming, right? Global coming down to the local point of view. And what I always tell everyone, no matter where you are, is to start small. Start real small. Start with yourself, right? Whether you're a part of a larger organization or not, start with what your why is, what your intent is, and you will go much farther than just trying to read some Wikipedia facts and jump on something really quick. Like you're not going to be as successful as you would like to be. And so if you can start with yourself, be authentic about what's the change that you want to see, it's a lot easier to go from there. But I will say, and I think it's in another slide that we'll get to, this is slow work, and you have to accept that. It's iterative, but it's slow. When we're talking about being intentional with the community, you have to see your community as your partner as well as a leader, right? So the community that you're trying to serve, right? So this is kind of a puzzle piece that I like to use when we're talking about all of the members, when we're talking about the food system, when we're talking about the community that we're serving. All members are leaders. People are authors of their own lives. We share a power-based and cultural practices and group dynamics. People must work collectively to understand the reality they seek to transform. People can do and practice transformation in their lives, relationships, and community. And people are resilient despite any of their constraints. And so when we can look at our community members, right, as leaders and giving them that authorship to be engaged, we can make sure that we are truly measuring ourselves for success when it comes to the programming that we're doing around our food system, right? There are multiple approaches to the work. I say that as well, right? Which ant do you want to be? There's the maintenance ant, there's the defender ant, right? I think there's some times where we all want everyone to look like the same unicorn, and it's just not possible. If your heart is in your hands in the land, be the best you can be at your hands on the land. If someone else is that activist, that fighter, that storyteller, then that's their lane. That's that organization's lane. And if someone else is more about seeing the soil as a spiritual entity of itself and the integrity of that, let them be that. Don't try, as Einstein used to say, don't try to judge a fish to climb a tree because it will always fail, right? Everybody has their lanes, but it's about how we collectively come together and use our talents for the good. So there's, let's get rid of judgment, y'all, and being critical. We can healthy challenge each other, right, in those lanes to grow, but making sure that we see the value in everyone's work. And so using the intersection, right, data plus people tell a truer, better story, right? So starting with your why and remembering that community coalition building can only move at the speed of trust. And it takes time to build trust with your community, with your partners that you're working with as well. But this is iterative work. So things will go fast, go slow, and you have to figure it out again, but always keeping your community at top of line and the intentionality around that. So from a local level, you have community meetings or house meetings. And when I say I started to do that type of work, I was meeting at little grandma's house from the church on the east side, talking like, so what are your problems? How hard is it for you to get to the grocery store, right? And then she's bringing her friends to the next meeting, right? We're starting very slow. We're only starting within 2 blocks of a zip code, right? Of trying to understand what are these needs. And then we expand out, what are the other people's needs? How do we cross barriers? And then how do we get intentional about what we're going to grow in our garden, how we're going to make sure that they can access that food, what other partnerships do we need, right? So it's slow, but it's iterative, right? And it's intentional. That's the way that you can make sure that you feel good about the work you're doing. You can measure it around your intentionality. You start small with those goals of those little groups that you start with and expand depending on where you are in that path or the organizations you are. You can always make sure that your compass is straight, that you're following your North Star when you do that. So other things as well as your workshops, having surveys, house meetings I talked to, valuing the lived experiences, right? There is so much, whether it's a community organization, whether it's a nonprofit, as well of not checking a box and leaving, right? You got this funding, your grant application was amazing, and your community didn't feel it. So what did you actually fulfill, right? What was your real intention? So it goes back to just really valuing lived experiences and being clear about your intentionality in the work you're doing and measuring yourself in the work that you're doing. At a city, state level, it's really important to know your representatives, starting with your councilman, who's in your district, where the district you live, the district that your garden's in, or your farm's in. Are Are you going to council meetings? Do you know when those sessions are? Do you know what the city work groups are around land access, around different codes for agriculture, right? Getting in the know of that. That can be really overwhelming. So finding supporting organizations that are already doing this work to partner with them, let them know about you, or for you to get engaged with them, for them to support your work as a fiscal sponsor, agent, et cetera. So, and then there's speak up channels. So like for San Antonio, we have SA Speak Up. We also had SA 2020, but that's going away. But an opportunity to really input your information, as well as going to the city council meetings. The budget, city budget is really important. For San Antonio, we also have the Food Policy Council that does a lot of different work around agricultural zones for urban agriculture, water reservation, chicken coops, et cetera. Then at a state level, you have the Farm Ranch Freedom Alliance. I'm sure feel like everyone kind of knows, or if you don't know, there's a conference every year where Judith and that team really focuses on the farm bill, focuses on things at the state and the national level to become more aware of and to activate. Then there's also the National Young Farmers Coalition that is really heavily focused on the Farm Bill 2023, looking at BIPOC land access and also capital market access for Black and brown farmers. So there's all of these different ways when we're talking about how do I take my work further, and the solution part of supporting my work, building on my why, being able to get the funding and the additional resources that you need of starting local at the state level and as well as national. And Stephen, you can jump in if there's anything you would add to it. But also other things, just to recap, right? We're identifying the problems, gathering data and people, doing the advocacy work, and then working on implementation. And it's all iterative every time, right? We're coming back to it. We're checking our intention, our North Star. We're looking at our gaps for resources, and we're trying to build other partners, right? Finding those other unique unicorns that are good at what they do to build those coalitions. So here's one piece of work that the Food Policy Council helped to implement was the Healthy Corner Stores in the city of San Antonio, where it was working with small corner stores that were in different districts to be able to provide a fresh produce stand, more or less. It started out in District 3, I believe, and what we saw, getting refrigerators and a stand in there, they were able to have a 600% revenue within the first 3 months. That's pretty amazing. That means where the data may have showed before that people don't want this food, they're not interested, showed in the money that they are. They want access to healthy, fresh food. There's other training and things that were put in place by Metro State as far as having community health workers come and do little tutorials about how to make certain things as well, right? We're building in that additional support, looking at those gaps, looking at what's asked. Now, from that one corner store, there's 50 participating healthy corner stores now throughout San Antonio with more to come. But they just started out with looking at the data, seeing the problem, being passionate about food, finding the right partners, getting the funding, and being able to explode. It's a really good example of that.
So again, we're sort of moving into solutions that are happening here in San Antonio. Healthy Corner Stores is a great example. Another one that we're currently working on is with the city turning vacant lots into urban farms. I think 96 to 98% of agricultural land is owned by white Americans. Between 1910 to 1990, 90% of black-owned land was lost, and through forces, through KKK, through Jim Crow, through all these different means of intimidation and killing to take that land. And so here in the urban core, where usually it's people in poverty of color, how do we gain access to grow food, right? So you start learning about food, you start becoming aware about food, your nutrition literacy, your food literacy, your health literacy improves, and now you want to grow food, but where do I grow that food at? Where do I have the opportunity to do that? And so part of that stolen land is owned by the municipal cities, right? These cities are the governments that have the land, and they don't have all of it, but they do have, hundreds of acres. If anybody's seen Ron Finley, the gangster gardener, right, he talks about how much land is owned by the city of Los Angeles. What's every city? It's Chicago, it's Miami, it's San Antonio, it's Houston, it's Dallas. And so the example that you see right here is Gardopia in 2011, just a vacant lot in between a gas station over there and a barber shop. Being underutilized, essentially, right? All of our communities have this. It doesn't really matter what metro you're in. You're going to see vacant lots everywhere. And so there's some really good examples I'll talk about outside of San Antonio, including Detroit. So we know that 07, 08 in the economic crash, that all of the major grocery stores moved out of Detroit. So you had all these vacant lots. You don't have a lot of food access. So the city created a program where they were allowed residents to farm on these vacant lots. And after a period of time, about 10 years, they actually would give the deed to the property to those stewards of the land. Another example is in Atlanta called Aglanta, a very similar program where essentially the city is creating opportunities for urban farmers to apply to access that vacant lot, as well as funding to be able to support their initiatives. Here in San Antonio, we were blessed to partner with the San Antonio Housing Authority. It's now called Opportunity Home. They had received a grant to reduce crime along some of the corridors of the east side. And so they did the normal policing type of approaches, where more police officers, drug raids. They got a shot spotter technology where they could track a gunshot in a mile radius to a pinpoint. But one of the grant managers, Will Miles and Brooke Crenshaw, I got to give them credit, said, let's try something different, right? Let's not just bring a whole bunch more guns and over-police our community. There's something called crime prevention through environmental design. So essentially, it's beautifying spaces, whether it's planting trees, whether it's providing lighting, whether it's creating pocket parks. There's all these different approaches, and this is an evidence-based practice that's international, SubTed International. So they brought down a trainer for us, and with community leaders, we sort of walked through the east side and identified areas and opportunities to create SubTed in our community. And this vacant lot was one of them. And so we partnered with the landowners to essentially take care of the grass, cut the grass. As you can see, there's a lot of trash out here. They were neglecting it. They weren't taking care of their property, and it had started to become an eyesore, and it had become a hot spot for crime, where a young man after the MLK March, we have one of the biggest marches in the nation, was shot and killed, right? So nobody wants that. It doesn't matter your ethnicity, your background, your affiliation. Like, people want to live in safe communities, and so how do you create those safe spaces? And so we created a garden. It started out with a couple of raised beds, and before you know it, we transformed it into a micro farm where we got chickens, and we have bees, and we have fish, we have farmers markets, we have cookouts, all these type of activation opportunities to engage the community, create that safe space, create the opportunity for food education, right? So this is barely a half acre. It's like 0.45 acres. We can't grow thousands and thousands of pounds of food because we're limited in space. But what we can do is we can teach people, right? They say, teach a man to fish, feed him for a day. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. I think if you teach a man to grow broccoli, you could probably feed a community. And so over the past few years, we have been able to turn it into this space here, where, this was an alley. That was just a caliche driveway, right? Like none of this was here. The economic return on investment that has been created from an initial $15,000 investment, we just filed our 990. We are at about $750,000, right? So everybody wants to talk about money and what's going to be the actual benefit of this to the community. Well, there's an economic development component where we're creating jobs. We now have 13 part-time staff, or 12 part-time staff and 3 full-time staff, right? So we're creating jobs, we're helping people understand their connection to the land and their connection to their bodies and to their food. We're creating a safe space. We have reduced crime at this intersection by 90%, right? So you think about how can we work with our community to do community policing, right? It's not necessarily you need more police officers. There's opportunities to bring leaders into our community, working with the youth, working with the local business members, and we together can make our communities a safer space. And so this is just one example. Moving forward, working with the city, they just approved $60,000 to find 3 urban lots that are owned by the city, essentially approximately $20,000 per lot, that other urban farmers can apply to have access to that land for a 10-year lease at, like, we're still working on the details, maybe like $1 a year or something, right? So providing the infrastructure, providing the startup capital, providing the training so that we can create more urban farmers, because there's not a lot, there's probably 5 to 10 urban farms in San Antonio proper within 1604, right? So it's not that people don't want to, it's one, encouraging it, and it's creating the investment so that more people can do it.
So that's $20,000 in addition to
The
access
lot.
to the land?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
So another thing that we've done is local food chats, and this is specifically some work that's come out of the Food Policy Council. And so this is a way to be able to engage the community around how we want to envision our local food system, right? So having all different types of conversations, and as well as people that show up, we're looking at all different food actors, right? From the farmer to the consumer, to the grocery store owner, to people that are councilmen in politics, et cetera, to come and have a conversation. What do you know about the food system? What are you feeling in your communities and what's happening? And so to really engage the community this way, to start thinking about how do we envision the future of what we need and of our systems in place right now. And this is all a part of, right, the storytelling, the gathering that turns into movement and advocacy, right? But you have to start that spark, right? And it just comes from a conversation. It comes from us sharing our stories. It comes from us breaking bread together. And so what we continue to do is to look at how we can expand these local food chats across every district, right? So it's a normal thing of where we gather and we're talking, and then we can promote more people to show up to city council offices, right? When it comes to the city budget, right? And feel empowered with the knowledge and being able to articulate what's happening in their community so that we can make changes as a whole.
So Food Forest, this is another initiative with the Food Policy Council. Essentially, it's more of a passive perennial approach than your annual crops. There's a really, I think, nice one up in Austin. I think it's Festival Beach Food Forest. And so we here in San Antonio worked with Bexar County Parks. So there's the county and then there's the city, right? So we're right now working with the county. I think it's about 4 or so acres, the Padre Park Food Forest. They just started planting about a year and a half ago. And they're in the process of cultivating the space with the community. So you have all different partners and organizations who are working with each other to create this shared space. Now we're in conversations again with the city. Not only did the city give $60,000 for urban farms, the idea of the definition, or the working definition, is an urban farm could be more of a closed off space, right? It wouldn't have access all the time to the public, not saying it wouldn't be publicly accessible, but there might be some open times per se, versus a food forest, which would be more publicly accessible at all times as a park would be available. So Parks and Recreation has about $150,000 to activate some spaces as well to be able to continue this process. So it's been 2016, SA Tomorrow came out, and one of the metrics on SA Tomorrow, which is our comprehensive city planning, to utilize underutilized land, right? And then in 2019, our climate adaptation and action plan came out as well to create mitigation strategies. That one also has a bullet point of utilizing underutilized land. And so now this is the example of it coming to fruition. And as this becomes more successful, the city of San Antonio has over 250 parks, owns over 13,000 acres. I did an internship in Vancouver in 2019, and I get off the bus and I see a whole bunch of blackberries growing. I'm like, that just makes sense, right? Now, apparently those blackberries are invasive, so that's another conversation. But all that being said, there should be, in South Central Texas, more pecans, right? We have a history of that. There could be figs, there could be pomegranates, there could be asparagus. I mean, there's just so many different perennials that can grow to create these spaces. And the community engagement. Again, the highest efficacy of urban agriculture is social acceptance, bringing people together. We're on our phones so much, right? We're on a screen 8+ hours a day. We're underneath these fluorescent lights all day. And so there's not the opportunity to engage outside that much. We have to encourage it. I'm trying to think. I had one more point I was going to make. It'll come back to me. But again, food forests are happening here in San Antonio. Farm to School is happening here in San Antonio. So that's something that Gardopia really focuses on as a garden-based learning organization. We believe that we have to start very young, right? By the time you're 18, 28, 38, 48, 58, it's difficult to make lifestyle changes. And so we need to start at 0. We need to start at 5. We need to start at 10, right? Very early, teaching these habits, teaching this knowledge, so that by the time everybody is, 18 years old, 20 years old, these kids know how to take care of these spaces. Because a lot of times community gardens are started, right? School gardens are started, but a year or two later, they're full of grass, right? So that's an issue on multiple fronts. One, from the investment that was made from the funders. Two, it's not giving us as gardeners and farmers a good name, right? It's like, what's going on here? And so, teaching the kids here, this is at Burbank High School. So San Antonio has agriculture magnet schools. This right here was a farm to school grant that we received from the USDA in 2022 at Young Women's Leadership Academy. This is a really good functioning garden in any ISD in Colonial Hills. And so it's very robust of what's happening here. But we're really scratching the surface. There's 16 school districts in San Antonio. That's just public school districts. That's not including charter schools and private schools, right? And so there's probably 1,000 schools in San Antonio. There's close to 300,000 plus youth in San Antonio. So we have a long way to go, but it is something that is a focus within the Food Policy Council, within Gardopia, and other organizations here in San Antonio.
And so, yeah, again, just to start small, start with you. So I had a small lot on the east side, and we just started. It was me and a dream and talking to the landowners of setting that up, and then collectively going door to door with the community to talk about the food and the access, right? And so we had 5 boxes. And so I got the little quilting ladies at the church that wanted to grow their own black-eyed peas and collards and stuff to come out and start supporting. And we talked about how to do drip irrigation, and we talked about these little things that they could implement in their own homes, and right, and going from first starting out to getting these bushels, then continuing to have this conversation with other Black farmers, right, and meeting up at places like this to network and to understand how are you growing food in your community, what are you doing, joining different training programs, right, to look at the political aspects of it, understanding the advocacy parts and those importancies to not just at a local level, but a national level, to then being able to support this type of growth where every day people can come out with their grocery bags to get a bundle of collard greens that could cost you $15 maybe at HEB. It's only gonna cost them $5 with us, right? And so it's again it's slow work, but it's intentional, and you can build up, and you can then build up your capacity by just taking that small step of your why, your data, your people, and then going from there.
So these are just 2 little quotes that I think are really important for us to remember. Sort of that call to action, right? And of course, we're preaching to the choir at the moment, but just remembering that, we can't eat money. And a lot of times that's what's driving us. But we do need money to buy land, to buy tractors, to buy soil, right? So finding that balance between getting the resources necessary to accomplish our goal, but also not allowing the resources to drive our mission. And then Fannie Lou Hamer, one of your idols as well, right? I saw this recently. We've just gotten so far away from our food system, right? We've just been totally disconnected I tell people you see an apple and it might have a sticker on there that says Washington or it might say Peru. And what did it take for that apple to get to you? It's taking thousands of miles. Think about all the CO2 emissions that are created. Think about all the unfair labor practices from our migrant farmers that are created. Think about the quality, the nutrient density of that apple. I was listening to NPR, and sometimes the apple farmers in Washington have a bumper crop, and the prices fall on the apples. And so what do? They just stick them in storage. 3 months, 6 months, a year. So you're eating apples that are 12 months old. The kids are eating that big red apple and it's smushy and they just throw it away. So now we're adding to food waste, and we really have to localize and regionalize our food systems. Texas, I think, is an opportune place to do that. Here in San Antonio, Texas, we have over 250 days of sunshine. We used to be one of the quote-unquote winter gardens, producing a large percentage of produce for the northern states. So it's not impossible. It's been done before. And as Fannie Lou Hamer reminds us, maybe a pig in a vegetable garden, we can feed ourselves and create food sovereignty within our communities. So I guess we'll open it up for a little bit of Q&A at this point if y'all have any questions for us. Or are people doing similar initiatives in your
Hey,
city?
it's an opportunity, right, to talk and listen, right?
Does your market support SNAP?
So we have a seasonal market, and no, we are not SNAP or WIC certified at the moment. I think the food bank does. I saw the Garcia Street Farm. I believe there are. So there are a few that do, but ours personally does not. A lot. So we actually don't sell produce. We usually get sponsors so that we can give produce away. So we'll work with the San Antonio Food Bank or work with HEB, and we'll just buy a lot of produce and we'll give it away. And then specifically at our micro farm, with our seasonal fruits and vegetables, we just have people come harvest as needed. Understanding the cost of food and how much food you have to sell to make a profit, right, is very difficult. And so for us, it's more about giving away what we can, and also we try to do a lot of cooking demonstrations. So we built a outdoor kitchen, and we have some cold storage as well. I think that's one of the downfalls of these smaller growing operations is food waste. And so I can grow cabbage, I can grow kale. What do I do with it, right? So bridging that gap is something we work on too.
How did y'all approach the city to start building or doing the gardening so that they don't take it down?
Well, that's the age-old story, right, of a community garden or a community farm getting started, and then the owner decides that there's a higher use of that land and says, hey, get out of here, right? And that comes down to the land ownership component. That's something that worries me again about that 10-year lease, because even after 10 years, you're still got work to do, right? It takes 5 years to just get a harvest from your fruit orchards. So in regards to approaching them, it's advocacy work. Again, we're both on the Food Policy Council, so we're meeting with our city council members, we're meeting with our county commissioners. They see us doing the work, right, as well. So
did y'all do that first?
What's that?
Did y'all do that first, approach them and talk about it, or did y'all just start working on the space?
For me, I can just speak about my story personally. I started it when I was in college, and then I had the university connect me to United Way. And so United Way had an initiative to increase access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So there's a metric of health, right? So increase access to fresh fruits and vegetables, increase physical activity. So they had a little bit of funding for that. So support from institutions was critical to my personal success. It's very difficult as an individual, a young individual, going out and saying, hey, I want to start doing some urban farming and gardening, right? It's all right, cool. There's some, maybe, go to your backyard or whatever. And then from there, the Housing Authority found us. They reached out to me individually and they said, hey, we know you have this nonprofit growing. We have this space that needs some cultivation and needs a little bit of rehabilitation. Are you willing to do it? So, and initially it was like, hey, we have a $500 budget. That's what they gave us, $500. And then after that, they gave us $8,000 a few months later, then they gave us $7,000. and they gave us a shipping container of tools. And so that's sort of where that $20,000, $20 to $25,000 startup cost is what we're estimating of what it would take to get a similar operation started. We also have, there's private landowners too, but I think being very wary of cultivating somebody else's space, right? This seems like sharecropping a little bit to me, and I think it's going backwards. So really what we're discussing, and I sit on a national nonprofit called Green. Essentially, they have created what's called a decentralized autonomous organization, so that these millionaires pooled about $6 million together. They're trying to do this through crypto, but essentially they awarded money to 6 organizations. Those 6 organizations then became the grant committee, and they granted another 12. And then those 12 became the grant committee. So now we have 144 organizations around the nation that all have a quote unquote token, and we get to vote on organizations who are going to get that next pot of money. So we have about 2.6 million in the treasury right now, and the conversation has been about Big Green being able to open up larger grants so you could create regional DAO farms for the community so that there's ownership amongst these organizations.
And I would say definitely like telling your story, telling what you want, you would be surprised. So for me of where I was going with my herbalism and then growing things and wanting to expand to be able to support and empower the community, having the courage to tell someone your dreams, and those opened up an opportunity for a plot of land that wasn't being used. Then talking to the district council people so they knew, right, and being able to support it should things come up. And then actually finding a UTSA business center, there are different lawyers and things like that that can help you look over a land stewardship, contract, right? And being able to get those things signed and what that looks like for a yearly, quarterly basis to be able to have some sort of, like if you go the private route, some sort of support or backing should, right, they decide to do something dastardly, right, to the space that you're being able to cultivate. So there's definitely multiple ways that you can go at it, but you also definitely need to think about the protection part, right, as Stephen said, when you go that route. But starting with your story and then making those connections through the city that we kind of talked about is really vital.
Are you seeing any data sovereignty coming together with community gardens? And you mentioned the DAOs and the crypto and that sort of thing. And I'm kind of wondering is there's a reevaluation of ecosystem services happening, right? And then we have these DAOs being developed, and the crypto and the ecosystem services valuation are growing really close together, kind of in tandem. And I know there's probably quite a few people here who have done participatory action research, and data sovereignty is part of that. But I have yet to see it kind of grounded in a space like a community garden. Do you know anything about that? Or is there anything like that that you've seen?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, we, of course, are collecting data with our community. One of the things we're looking at is food production, right? So how much food is being produced in the city? Nobody knows. There's no data point on that, probably for most cities. Austin, estimates that less than 1% of food consumed in the city is grown in the city, right? So we have this huge gap. And then how much food is being imported into the city as well? So you'd have to, the ideas we get with H-E-B, Walmart, Benny Keith, Cisco, and, would they be willing to give us that data so that we can say, okay, we're importing X amount, we are consuming X amount, or we're producing X amount, where's that gap at? So those are things that we are currently at the beginning stages of. I know that our Metro Health Department has a program called Healthy Neighborhoods Program, and they have what are called health workers or promotores. And so I know that they are working hand in hand with the community, but what data is being collected. And then you're talking about data sovereignty, so you're saying that we have access to the data?
Yeah, and y'all would own the data. So I think I'm early to this idea, but young, I don't know how to say it. let's say you're working with the state or with a university, and they want to collect data, they want to ask your questions, they want to hear your stories and that sort of thing. There has historically been kind of an extractive process there. You go in, you collect the data, and then you never see them.
Yeah, and then you write the grant and get
they
the money. Yeah.
off the reports, and they generate so much profit off of extracting information and stories and cultural value. And so the idea with data sovereignty is that you create ownership for the community to own the data.
Yep.
And that there's more with the infrastructure of, actually having a server on site
Yeah,
and other things like that.
Yeah.
But that's where the ecosystem valuation services in this crypto world, there's crossover there. I think Regen, it's kind of like Big Green, or I don't know if you know, it's like Regen Artisans Network or something like that. They're also doing that.
Okay.
They're trying to make it to where if you buy land through a DAO together, whenever you're partnering with anybody, you can make money off your own data. So I don't like necessarily where the commodification of all this is going, but I think it's important for us to have privacy over our data and ownership. And it's coming, so I'm always curious in spaces like this.
Yeah, no, I think I hear a future topic for next year's conference. I'm a big fan of open source at the minimum, right? So you need to have a dashboard. And she mentioned SA 2020. That was an organization that was collecting data and had a dashboard and had access. And essentially, we as nonprofits and other organizations are uploading our data into it. But then we have access to everybody's data. So if we want to write a grant, we can say, hey, this is what food security looks like, or this is what poverty looks like, or homelessness looks like. So that's one, and that dashboard is going to be up until until September.
Yeah.
At the moment. So.
Can you talk a little bit more about like your kitchen space and the importance of like cooking assistants and stuff? Because like when you are poor, everything just takes so much more time, and a lot of times you're gonna maybe cut corners for dinner, and having all these fresh fruits and vegetables you need to prepare might be like a little bit too intensive for like your day-to-day. I know I work with like a farm and food bank program where we harvest all the produce, we make meal kits that are pretty much ready to eat, and that has been really, really helpful to just like taking something off of someone's plate. I know like just giving people access to food is amazing, but that last little hurdle I'm obsessed with when it comes to like making sure the food gets cooked and consumed is still really nutritious. And your kitchen's amazing.
Thank you. No, that's I think a really big challenge and a part of food waste. As a producer, you see how many tomatoes don't get harvested, right? Or even once you harvest those tomatoes, how many of those tomatoes go bad, right? And then once those tomatoes get to the plate, how many of those tomatoes get eaten, right? So there's all this waste along the supply chain. For us, we have what are called Saturday volunteer days. So every Saturday, people can come volunteer with us. And that's from like 9 to 11. And so what we're trying to move into is after that volunteer day, then that space from like 11 to 12, we can do a cooking demonstration with whatever's in season. So we used some mirror mushrooms not too long ago. So he's with CTMS, Central Texas Mycological Society. If you don't know, follow them. But they have this really cool program where they have mushroom blocks. And so these mushroom blocks are brought to us, and we have all these mushrooms that are blooming, and we're able to cook those up. Right now what's in season is our leafy greens, right? So we're cooking up some sautéed greens, eggs, right? So, maybe making some scrambled eggs or things of that sort. So trying to keep it as simple as possible would be my personal goal to make it occur. And then aside from that, we also do a couple of activation events. So we've started piloting First Fridays. That's sort of a thing here in San Antonio. And then we also have farmers markets. So usually at our farmers markets, we'll have a local chef. So a local chef will come and do like a 30-minute cooking demonstration and then do taste testing as well. So that's currently what our culinary activities look like at Gardopia. Like you said, we built a kitchen island with a couple of sinks on it, and then we bring sort of the mobile kitchen with hot plates and cutting boards and all the cutlery and things of that sort.
And in my head, I'm thinking about the other partner organizations that do specifically like community health workers, San Antonio Botanical Gardens, right, someone that has that passion about that cooking part of the partners that we can grow, right? Because Gardopia, like all of us, right, together we can do more in being able to funnel that work and how we can do that collectively. So that's what popped up in my head when you're talking about it, that I know that they do a lot of that and how that could be expanded, right? So.
Yeah, it really comes down to the resources. So, a farmer's a farmer, a chef's a chef, a principal's a principal, right? So, valuing those careers, valuing those professions, and then finding the funding to hire them to do this work. So I had put out about $1 million proposal where we would have a chef and a gardener in every district. So there's 10 city council districts. And so this chef and gardener would go around to the community gardens and school gardens and community farms and help with maintenance, but also do some of this education, right? And that would make it more manageable than, like she's saying, one organization trying to do it all. No one organization can do it all, but I think if we started investing in people, and there's plenty of people with the skills and the knowledge to do it, you start to create an industry, essentially, right? A culinary industry, a food industry, whatever we want to call it.
With that chef too, you can start doing value added stuff and like increase the shelf life.
Mhm,
Reduce
mhm.
a lot of that waste too.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Lost art, right? Canning and preserving.
Yep, that's my mama answer. That's her thing. Cool.
Other good examples of things y'all are doing in your city, or maybe some suggestions for folks?
It's not really an example, but just, I know the city of Austin is currently working on food plan, there's a lot of people in here involved. But, what suggestions would you have, I guess, as far as like, how could we effectively get them to like listen and like maybe try some of these things, like the vacant lots or like.
The cities, how to get them. It comes down to relationships. I don't know how Austin works, but we have 10 city council districts, and then we have 4 county commissioner districts. So we have about 14 people, and then you add the mayor and the judge, about 16 people. Those 16 people are in charge of probably close to $10 billion annually, right? So the general operating budget for San Antonio is $1 billion, and then they have capital projects, which are a couple more billion. And then same for the county, right? So when you start thinking about that, writing $1 million check or a $10 million check for food system isn't a lot. But you have to have the data behind you to show that this can work. Capacity too. If I give you $1 million check right now, do you know what to do with it? Are you going to steward those dollars properly? Do you have all of the financial parameters in place to be good stewards of those dollars is really important. So building capacity within the local organizations, I think, is something that there are some foundations here in San Antonio that help with capacity building that we've been a part of, and I'm sure in all different cities. So building those relationships with the elected officials, building those relationships with the departments. So for us, it's Metro Health, it's the Office of Sustainability, it's the World Heritage Office. It's these different entities within the city that have more stability, right? Because an elected official might be gone after one term. And now you have to start this whole process over again. For us on the east side, we've had 5 city council members in a decade, right? So it's like every year we're just restarting this conversation, which can be a little frustrating. But once you do develop those relationships with them, then the other component is advocating at the budget time. So budgets usually start October 1st, right? So if you know that, cities are starting to think about budget right now in like February and March. They're already having these backroom discussions. So we need to start submitting some proposals like, hey, with 100,000, with maybe a couple million, like we could do some really good work. And then building the coalitions. I think the Food Policy Council, has been good where it's not just about Gardopia. They're not just writing Gardopia a check, right? They're not just writing Malway or Sustainable G's a check. I think if you come in coalitions and build that together, a good example is in Seattle. So the city of Seattle just recently gave $2 million to the food system, 20 organizations. Each organization got $100K. $100K for an organization, it might not make your budget, but it's going to be a start. That's a couple of positions, right? Maybe get you a grant writer, maybe get you a development person, maybe hire a full-time farmer, whatever it might be. And then little by little it starts to compound.
As part of the Food Policy Council, have y'all heard any words of people like from restaurants getting food that's being wasted from restaurants and like grocery stores to like homeless or, putting it to somebody that needs it as opposed to just being thrown, discarded and thrown away. Finding channels for that, have y'all talked about that? Maybe getting the city deregulating? Because I know there's a lot of regulations revolved around it because, there's the food expiring and not, but there is a certain window. I just didn't know if that's any conversations that have come up on your end or y'all been involved with. I'm just curious.
It definitely has when we had our citywide food chat or food conversation we had around the UN's initiative. And so, like, even thinking about the food that gets sent to food banks that sometimes already expired or is on the brink of expire, how can we get that in front? So it's definitely been a topic, and I don't know if Stephen's heard more, but it hasn't been necessarily something that has been expanded on further.
Yeah, I know that individuals who own restaurants or small convenience stores may do it just out of their own heart, but at a policy level, that hasn't, I think, come to fruition here in San Antonio yet.
The San Antonio Food Bank used to, but then they had to, I think there was a funding issue where they had to stop that program.
Yeah, a lot of times it comes down to resources, right? Like
Yeah.
you want to give away this food, but now I need to send somebody to give away this food, right? I need to take the man hours. There was a news story with Meals on Wheels here in San Antonio, right? Meals on Wheels, there was a picture of a former employee that there was all these bananas in the trash can, in the dumpster, right? There were all these finished meals in the dumpster. And so everyone's like, what's going on here? Like, this is a huge funded organization. How are they allowing this to happen? And so not trying to like rag on them or anything, but it happens. And a lot of times it can be a budget or a fiscal decision to not take that next step to get it to somebody who can eat it. And so, I think that's something good to focus on.
It's happened in a few cities, but there's been like small pilot programs. And once it's gotten deregulated from the city, then people come together and figure out, how to get it to people and, traffic it to the right people. But
Yeah.
I think the first step is getting it, as the city's policy to do that.
Yeah. I shouldn't get arrested because I'm trying to give away food.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I encourage y'all to follow us at Gardopia Gardens, our website, gardopiagardens.org. Also, it's foodpolicysa.org if you're interested in the Food Policy Council. We should be, if you're in the San Antonio region, hosting a meeting pretty soon. If you're not in San Antonio, raise your hand if you're in the San Antonio area. Okay, a few of you. No, if you're not in San Antonio, I would encourage you to find a local coalition in backing your city. I know it's tough to start things, right? It takes a lot of energy to get those things going, but maybe I'll just meet annually, the beginning of the year. Let's just meet. What initiatives do you got going? What initiatives you got going on? Is there any intersection? And then from that annual meeting, it might move to a quarterly meeting, and then expand from there. And then you can follow her too.
Yeah, you can follow me at sustainablegs.org on Instagram, as well as Maui Apothecary. We just had a film screening of Gaining Ground, the Fight for Black Land. In our next event, we're having a Farmer Jubilee during Black History Month, where we're going to focus on the contributions of Black farmers, but everyone is invited, and we're going to have panel discussions, hands on the land at Heavenly Gardens, tasting, but also talking about homesteading, technical assistance, how to get started. And so it's a great opportunity, again, for these kind of conversations to take place. And if you're interested, we have flyers on the table, but definitely appreciate you all. Don't be a stranger, and let's just keep building.
Okay. And I have some cards over there as well. So thank y'all.
I've got a survey.
Survey, yes. If you take a card, probably just call or text me. I don't check my Trinity email that much, so just a heads up.
Thank you.
Oh, here, let me move that out of the way.
I love your